There is, and as I've been discussing, the naturalistic perspective. And this, the Expositor's Bible commentary, this one here, is a proponent of the naturalistic argument. So what this is saying is that God used natural means for the plagues. And in fact, I'm going to take a quick little tangent here and read. This is the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary, Volume 1, which covers Genesis through Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch. And it has actually an interesting article here that I'm just going to read briefly. In the 1950s, Greta Hort gave the most detailed explanation of the theory that the plagues described in Exodus could have occurred naturally within Egypt, given the right conditions. In a sense, they were a natural disaster. Hort believed that the first 6 plagues formed a progression of events, each of which naturally resulted from one of the plagues before it. The next 3 plagues fit with the general pattern of the Egyptian agriculture and seasonal calendars. The last plague, of course, does not correspond to any natural phenomenon. Here's a more specific overview of this theory. Blood. The water did not change into actual blood, and this is just a theory. Instead, it took an appearance of blood. This could have been caused by flagellates, single-cell organisms living in the water, flowing down the Nile from Ethiopia. Certain types of flagellates made the river water appear red, and because they upset the balance of oxygen in the water, killed the fish. We discussed this when we talked about the first plague on the Nile. The frogs were already abundant along the bank of the Nile, but with the changes in the river due to the flagellates, many more came up on the land. Their sudden death in Exodus 8:13 was caused by anthrax contracted from the piles of rotten fish. This then led to the gnats and the flies. The flies, biting flies, appeared for the same reasons as the gnats, spreading diseases on humans because of all the rotting fish and rotting frogs. Then the livestock plague, this would be anthrax that was brought on because of all of from the flies, because of all the frogs and possibly the gnats. The boils, anthrax was symptoms, one of the symptoms is boils, which spread to humans by the flies. We'll talk about that in a second. The hail, though, violent thunderstorms occur in Egypt during the time when barley and flax are harvested. That doesn't correspond to the previous plagues. Locusts, large swarms of invading locusts are known in the Middle East and Northern Africa. That also doesn't play into a progression. But these first plagues of the blood, frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, the naturalistic or the natural phenomenon, the naturalistic argument is that God used the natural means to bring about one plague to the next. And I'm not arguing against this. I'm not saying that God can't use his creation in natural ways of doing these things. But the downside or the error that you can get into when you start following this very specifically is saying that everything in here can be explained by nature. The whole point of what is happening here in the plagues is that they can't be explained, that it clearly shows the hand of God, the thumb of God, as Janus and Jambres said in the last plague, where the magicians tried to recreate it with the flies, and they couldn't recreate it, and they gave credit to God for what God was doing. The whole point of all of this, everything that is happening with all of these plagues, is to, one, show God's power and greatness in saving the saving the Israelites as God promised that he would in Genesis 15. He says that he says this to Abraham, your people will be in bondage for 400 years in a land that is not their own. He prophesied that this was going to happen. And he says that when he brings them out, it's an additional showing of his strength and his power, and that he is a redeemer, that he rescues his people. We've discussed this before. Isaiah talks about and references the people of Israel being brought out of Egypt as a testament to the fact that God will be there as the Redeemer for Israel, prophesying for when they're in captivity in Babylon, a prophecy that would come to pass that God would bring them also out of Babylon. God also does this, so you have to show his strength and his power to his own people. We had a verse that we discussed where God was showing a new definition of his name. In Exodus chapter 3 and 4, we get Yahweh, I am. And that name has new meaning because of the Exodus as a Redeemer God. And we discussed that. Then you have showing his power against Pharaoh and against Egypt. They believed in the Egyptian pantheon of gods. And Exodus 12:12 tells us that God is battling against those false gods to show what they really are. And we talk about this with each of these plagues that outpours, that there is an element of the Egyptian gods that are under attack, so to speak. So when we look and try to justify and explain through natural means each of these plagues, the thing that you cannot explain naturally is the timing, and you can't explain naturally the being set apart that Israel is set apart so clearly. We have that in 9:4. The Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt. We're also going to see it in 9:26 with the hail. The hail only affects Egypt, and that also is a miraculous thing. To justify all of these natural things, these things happening naturally, you can see the progression of one leading to another. But the fact that Moses comes in and gives a warning, this is going to happen tomorrow. And then tomorrow, boom, it happens. And then Pharaoh will request, Moses, please pray to your God to relieve these things from happening. The frogs, for example. Moses allows Pharaoh to set a date and time. And for some reason, Pharaoh says, tomorrow, take this away. And tomorrow, all of them die. The naturalistic argument is that they all had the anthrax sickness and they all died all at once. But as you go through each of these, the timing of it is supernatural, without question. Okay, verse 4